So Gladiator 2 was directed by Ridley Scott and it stars Paul Mescal, Pedro Pascal, Connie Nielsen, Denzel Washington, and Joseph Quinn. And this movie taking place 16 years after the events of the first Gladiator movie. A man named Lucius, who is Connie Nielsen's son from the first movie, is captured by these Roman emperors who are very corrupt and such. Now he must fight in the Colosseum to regain his honor, basically try to overtake Rome, while other situations are going on, particularly with Denzel Washington's character. This was a movie that I've actually been interested in for a little bit now. It seemed like Gladiator was like this massive movie that came out. I didn't see Gladiator until like several years down the line because I think the first movie came out when I was like 6 years old or something like that. But I do really like the first Gladiator movie. I do think Russell Crowe's great, Joaquin Phoenix is great. I love the scope of the movie. It's definitely a very well made movie overall. Not a movie I go to every once in a while, but I do respect it overall. But I was curious to see what this movie was like because obviously we're getting a lot of sequels to movies that are really old now, and I'm kind of curious to see like what this was going to be like, especially with actors such as Paul Mescal, Pedro Pascal, plus Denzel Washington being thrown in the mix. Denzel can really do no wrong no matter what. Connie Nielsen was coming back for this movie, so I was curious to see what this movie was going to be like. And Ridley Scott is pretty hit or miss when it comes to movies. For every movie he does, like obviously he's made great movies like the first Gladiator, Alien, Blade Runner, and such. He's kind of had a few misses over the last few years, like House of Gucci and Napoleon, in my opinion. So I was definitely a little nervous about this movie too. But honestly, after a little bit, I actually did like this movie overall. I thought it was pretty epic. I thought it was very well done. But let's talk about it overall. First off, I thought the actors did a good job for the most part. Paul Mescal, I thought he was really good in the movie. He was very brutal. He was very well. I thought his character was very interesting as well. Denzel Washington, I thought, stole this entire movie. Denzel is usually a very good actor, and this movie, it looks like he's having a lot of fun with this movie. He's one of the main villains of the movie, and I think he does a really good job. And I think he's very underrated as a villain overall. Obviously, he was a villain in Training Day and such, but he's very good no matter what role he does. Among the other actors, Connie Nielsen does a pretty good job. I did like her character in this movie just as much as I did in the first movie. Pedro Pascal, he's good for some of his scenes. Like, he has a few fight scenes with Paul Mescal. I thought he was really good in those scenes. Joseph Quinn has a little bit of fun with his performance, even if his character is not really that well realized. But I feel like his character, at least, is kind of fun. Like, he infuses some sort of energy into it that was like, okay, at least you're doing better than what you were initially given. So that's pretty good. The scope of this movie is absolutely incredible. Like, I was watching this movie and I'm like, this looks incredible. Like, this looks absolutely brilliant, beautiful at times. Like, I wish I saw it on a much larger screen, like an IMAX screen, because I just kind of want to explore what Rome looks like, basically. Very interesting. The score, very well done as well. It's not just a copy of the original score. It's not. It still feels epic in a lot of ways. It still feels like it's its own thing, and I do feel like that's very well done. The production design, very well done. The brutality of this movie. That sounds weird, but I do feel like there's a lot of great sequences in this movie. Whether there's like the opening scene where Paul Mescal's captured and such, which may be a spoiler, but it's literally in the first 10, 15 minutes. To the Colosseum fights, most of them are pretty well done. They're pretty violent, they're pretty shocking, they're pretty gruesome at times. I do think they're very intense. They were very well done. And also, for a movie that's 2.5 hours long, I never really felt that this movie was 2.5 hours long. It felt like 2 hours. And I definitely feel like, this is one of those like movies that, it goes by really quickly. And also while watching it, it's like, since I never saw the original Gladiator, there was a part of me that was kind of thinking while watching it, it's like, oh, this is what it must have been like to watch Gladiator back then. This is what it must have been like to watch the original back in theaters, back all the way in the year 2000. Which is also kind of a negative now that I get into it, but let's talk about that. The first thing I don't like about this movie is, without doubt, there are a few beats in this movie that are a little too similar to the first Gladiator movie. And obviously there's the connection between Paul Mescal's character and Russell Crowe's character, but there's also a lot of stuff involving, it's basically, there are plot points that are just kind of similar to the first movie, and it can be distracting at times. It's never enough to the point where I'm like, oh, this is just a complete retread of the original movie. And there's enough there to kind of make you go, oh, I remember that from the first movie. But it's not enough to annoy you, I guess the best way to say it. And even though a lot of the fights look pretty gruesome and pretty graphic, and at times they actually look and feel very real, there are some moments where I'm like, that clearly does not look real. Like, particularly some of the CGI. Like, there's one involving an animal. The animal itself does not look particularly great. And I can understand why you wouldn't want to have an animal in this particular scene. It's one of the first animal encounters, I'll give it that. But, like, I was looking at the visuals, I'm like, oh, this is not the same guy who did movies like Alien and Blade Runner and Gladiator and such. Like, no, but it is. And like I mentioned earlier, some of the characters themselves are not very well developed. Like Paul Mescal, sure. Denzel Washington, sure. Connie Nielsen, sure. But there are a few characters in this movie that I feel like they don't really have much character. Pedro Pascal has some character in him, and I do think he tries the best that he can. Joseph Quinn and the other actor, I forgot his name unfortunately, who played the two emperors. Like, they're clearly trying to have a little fun with their performances, but at the same time I feel like their character's not very, very well defined. There are a bunch of other characters in this movie where I'm like, oh, you could kind of do a little bit more with their characters, but you don't want to. But then again, this is mostly about Paul Mescal and his character and what he's going through and such, so I guess that kind of makes it up for it. But I feel like there are some characters where I'm like, you want them to be important, but I feel like you're not really giving them enough tools to make them entirely important, other than, hey, just do whatever you want with the performance and such. But, and I will also say, about the first like 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes of the movie, I was not on board. I felt like there was not enough emotion. Like, it was clearly emotional, but I never really felt anything. Like, they kind of want to force you to feel something, but they never really go in depth with a lot of the reasons why this is emotional and such. And I kind of don't like it when movies are just saying, hey, feel something, but they never want to earn that emotion. And I feel like, at least in the first 10, 15 minutes or so, it definitely does not feel like it's earned. It just feels like it's just going through the motions rather than just saying, this is why this is important. So, but despite all that, I would still recommend this movie, mainly because the fight sequences are really good. Everything in the Coliseum I thought was very well done. The acting is very well done, particularly from Mescal in Washington and Nielsen and such. The scope is incredible. The score is very well done. The production design and cinematography are just incredible. I wish I saw it on a much larger screen at times. And I do think that the pacing of this movie is very well done. But I will admit, I think some CGI is not particularly great. There's some lackluster character development. There's also, the first 10, 15 minutes or so. And also, without a doubt, it's a little too similar to the first Gladiator movie in some ways. But I would definitely recommend this movie in some way, especially if you really like the first one. So I'll give Gladiator 2 3 out of 4 stars. See it. So, what's your favorite, movie that's kind of like Gladiator, but maybe not exactly Gladiator? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.